Uniso State University and an MSc in African Studies from the University of Edinburgh. He also has a BA in Political Science with Sociology from the University of Ghana. He teaches and facilitates a number of courses at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Teaching Center, Training Center. His research interests involve transitional and relational justice, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration in conventional and non-permissive contexts, among quite a number of other things. He has published a number of scholarly papers on peacekeeping in Africa, indigenous conflict transformation strategies, and elections in Ghana. He's quite a big man, you would agree with me. Okay, thanks so much for coming. Our next person is Dr. Efua Boatima Yakohene, who is also a research fellow at the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, LICIAD, at the University of Ghana, Legon. Is she here, please? Okay. Dr. Efua Yakohene is a research fellow and focus person for training at the Legon Center of International Affairs and Diplomacy, where she teaches Africa in world politics, gender and international relations, and research methodology. She was educated at the University of Ghana for both her BA and MPhil, and the Scuola Superior Sant'Anna di Studi Universitari, please help with that, which is in Italy, where she did her PhD. Her research areas are peace building, governance, and gender issues in Africa. She also has experience in training, workshop facilitation, teaching and research on diverse areas of peace and security. Efua has had the privilege of being a part of various African Union trainings, workshops, and restoring exercises geared towards establishing the African Standby Force. So that is Dr. Efua for you. Thanks so much for coming, Doc. Our third person is Dr. Patrick Osei Kufuor, who is the head of Department of Peace and Development Studies at the University of Cape Coast. Is he here, please? Okay. Please, we should clap for them as they come. You would agree their profiles are very heavy. Dr. Patrick Osei Kufuor is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Cape Coast and the convener for the Peace and Development Research Cluster at the Institute. His research places emphasis on understanding poverty and institutional equity with a particular application for decentralized local governance. Specifically, his research focuses on the various ways of making governance institutions at the local level work better for development and poverty reduction in Africa. The fifth person on the list is Osei Bonsu Dixon, who is a chief legal advisor, National Security Council Secretariat, and coordinator, Security Governance Initiative. Let's clap for him, please. Osei Bonsu Dixon is an internationally known national security lawyer, author, and adjunct lecturer. He was educated at University of Ghana, Harvard University, and the Ghana Law School. His expertise lies in the law and governance of extreme risk, particularly those bearing on national security, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats, money laundering, terrorism, cyber, maritime, border, and internal security. He was recipient of the first prize of the Ghana School of Law's 44th Moot Court competition held at the Supreme Court. In 2016, he also won the 4th Joy FM debate on securing intelligence with Dr. Kwesi Ani. He has authored 3 books, is an adjunct lecturer, board member of Ghana's Financial Intelligence Center, and national focal point for the International Criminal Court. That's a very heavy profile. Thanks so much for joining us. The 6th person is Dr. Mr. Sadiq Educhum, who is a student analyst. Is he here, please? Okay. It's good. I like the fact that we've tried to include a student analyst so that he can also represent our students in the room. Sadiq Educhum is a former naval officer, currently pursuing Master of Arts in Conflict, Peace and Security at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. So ladies and gentlemen, those are the people who would form the panel. Let's round it up with a very big applause. The moderator for the session. Okay. Okay. We also have another high-level person who will be joining us for this discussion. He's in the person of Dr. Kumi Ansakoi, who is a senior lecturer, Political Science Department, University of Ghana. Is Doc here, please? Okay. Dr. Kumi Ansakoi is a senior lecturer at the University of Ghana, as I mentioned. He holds a BA, an MA, and a PhD degrees from University of Ghana, and also holds an advanced diploma in conflict resolution from Uppsala University and a diploma in human rights from the ISS, Netherlands. Dr. Kumi Ansakoi has lectured on peace and security issues and numerous institutions, including the Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College, as well as the Kofi Annan and the University of Education in Winneba. So now the team is complete. Our moderator for this session would be Mr. Kwesi Akwasam, who works with us here at the Association of African Universities. So we are ready. Would encourage all of us to really listen attentively and contribute when the discussion starts. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Felicia, for bringing up our panel members. You would agree with me that this is a heavy panel, and I think I need a lot of strength to face them as well, in terms of knowledge, experience, and everything on the theme. But I believe that we are going to have a fruitful discussion. What we are going to do uniquely today is that we have an hour. They will have about 30 minutes, and those of us in the room will also have 30-minute engagement period. So as they make their submissions, kindly put your points down. When the time comes, you don't start from Northern Region, Sunyani, before you come to Accra. Go straight to the point so that we can leave here exactly before 2 o'clock as scheduled. We are privileged to have our chair, who is Professor, and I like always mention the N, the 5 N's in our midst. Prof, you are so unique. Great. And he is our chair. But before he gives his remarks, we would have 3-minute remarks from the Executive Secretary of NAPTEX in the person of Mrs. Sheila Boama. Shall we put our hands together for her as she makes just 3 minutes before the chair gives his remarks? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, AAU, for this kind invitation. We went through a similar week last year or last 2 years, and it culminated in something at La Palm, which was very good. I'm happy to be here. I've learned a lot. The topic is quite close to me, and I'm happy that we are going to look at the issue of quality in higher education. Just yesterday, my colleagues and I were discussing this very issue from TEMA, and we were debating which one should come first. Should we have access before quality or quality before access? We talk about the demographic dividends that Africans have by the structure of our population. The question is, do we have that dividend? Is our demography a positive or a negative? The quality of our demographics are all linked to issues of quality education. Quality in whose eyes? Are we measuring Ashasi quality with my own university, University of Ghana? Let me use myself. Are we measuring, when they said Harvard, people said, And I said, why did you not say the same when they said UCC? What is it about it? So like one of the speakers said, the quality parameters that we are measuring our education by Is it within our context, or we are measuring it by the international standard, such that when we pick our student at any day, any time, randomly, and pick another student from the so-called Harvards that make us shiver, our students are confident enough to meet the same person at the same level and in a discussion or debate. So we are quite keen to hear a lot about how to improve quality as we contribute in our various corners to improve on this very need in our higher education space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not too sure whether you wanted to clap. Oh, you wanted to clap? Oh, okay. All right. Okay, thank you so much, the Executive Secretary of NAPTEX. Yes, Paul. Next, we'll call on Prof. Nsuanyama, who is the chair, to give us a brief remarks. And after that, Prof. will take his chair here, and I will move up to the high table. Thank you so much. Let's put our hands together for Prof.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary and my other colleagues in this room. I think I'm really intimidated by the people around me. I'm a statistician by training, and actually today I should have been somewhere else. That's where I belong to. They have African Statistics Day being celebrated today at La Palm, and I was supposed to be there, but my position as the vice president of AAU didn't give me that permission to be where I belong. And then I just realized that really, especially this session where I'm supposed to be the chairman, I look around and I said, I don't think I was the person to be. Because really with all these peace, all this, that and so forth, very intimidated. But I think I'll manage to survive. Yeah. So on this short note, let me say that I'm happy to have all of you here, and I hope that the discussion is going to benefit all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If Prof. Nyama is intimidated, who am I? Yes, so if the professor is intimidated, I think I have to borrow some shoes. Prof, can I come for your shoes? So that at least I will be able to face the panel members. But I know they are friendly. Academics are very friendly. And so we are going to have a beautiful discussion. Now, you have already been introduced, and so I will not give you the chance for you to tell us about you. We know you more. When we're putting together the theme for this year's celebration, there were a lot of schools of thought. Some felt, what is the correlation between quality higher education and peaceful and secure Africa? We had to put our heads together to find out where the two really come together. If we have quality higher education, does it necessarily mean that we would have a peaceful and secure Africa? Do we think that having a peaceful and secure Africa has anything to do with quality higher education? And that is your opening statement, 3 minutes from each of our panel members. I don't know where to start from, but I think I will start from the shortest here from my left. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for pulling this very important meeting together. There is certainly a very close relationship between quality higher education and ensuring or securing peace and security on the continent. And the other way is also true, that you cannot have quality education in the context of violence. You know, you can have that only in an atmosphere of peace and security. And that is very true if you consider what is going on in the continent, in parts of the Sahel, in Libya, in northeastern Nigeria. It is very difficult for anyone to begin to talk about quality education in context where people are not sure of their survival in the first instance. So for that, I think it's a very appropriate theme for this year's celebration. But let me just mention that, as we all know, or maybe familiar, Africa's security environment is undergoing profound transformation, partly in response to fundamental events and processes that have been taking place since the late 1980s. These include the demise of the Cold War, the process of globalization, and the intensification of interactions along diverse cultural, tendencies within the context of a shrinking global space. The emergence of intrastate conflict as the most prevalent and deadly form of armed violence. The increasing activeness of Africa's regional and sub-regional organizations that operate alongside the state. The 9/11 terrorist attacks on the United States and the concomitant war on terrorism. The Arab Spring and the fall of the Gaddafi regime in Libya. Significantly, the threat of war between African states has been virtually non-existent. As you would realize, most of the conflicts we talk about are conflicts occurring within states. Hardly have we, it's only on few instances where we've had interstate conflict between countries. Most of them are intrastate in nature. Even though Africa's security dilemmas have manifested mostly within state, most of the theories we read in our classrooms, okay, so I teach international relations, and one of the critical theories I teach in international relations is political realism, okay? That tells us that in order to be secure, we need to have power. In other words, security is a derivative of power, okay? The more power you have, then the more secured you have, okay? But this assumption was based on a certain premise, the idea that security will necessarily originate from outside. So Ghana may be attacked by Nigeria, or Togo may be attacked by Ghana, and therefore these countries should amass power that is necessary and adequate to ward off aggression. But the question is, are these the type of conflict we are experiencing on the continent? Right? If we consider the type of conflict happening in northeastern Nigeria involving Boko Haram, in Mali involving Ansar-Din or Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and just last week we had a series of attacks in Burkina Faso by non-state actors or non-sovereign entities, right? So there is a fundamental need for us to begin to question even the very theories that we teach in class. Earlier, Prof talked about indigenous approaches to conflict. I have also always said that it is important we understand the nature of the African state, right? The African state is far different from the European state, along which characteristics the African state is modeled. When you go to UK or when you go to Germany and the president speaks, or there is a law emanating from the political hierarchy, that is supposed to be complied with by all. But then in our setting, we have instances where there are parallel structures. There are instances where there may be a particular law or legal provision. People are even reluctant to comply with those provisions. But then when some, big authority, or shall I say traditional authority, speaks in their, community, they are much more willing to comply with those directives. The point is not that it is a wrong thing to follow such directives from traditional rulers, but then I think it is necessary for us to begin to understand how these different power centers can begin to work together, right? So there's often the talk about hybridity or hybrid power structures and political formations, right? I did some research in Liberia some time ago, and there was a community in which I went, where part of my research was based. And in that community, they have concluded that disputes among people should not go outside of the court, I mean outside of the community. So if you went to the police or if you decided to go to court, they will go to the police and withdraw the case and settle them at home. The only type of conflicts or disputes that were allowed to go to the police were those bordering on felony, okay? So armed robbery, rape, murder, but then petty crimes and common disputes were not supposed to go outside of the community. Why? Because you see, in those communities, relationships matter to people, right? When people go to court and there are settlements, and of course, you know, the statutory court decisions are based on zero-sum decisions, okay? So it is a win-lose. You cannot both go to court and, you know, have your case determined where both parties win. One would have to win, one loses. So in those communities, if someone or two people went to court and then one was sentenced, and so they were doing a term imprisonment, people within the community even blamed the victim who took the other party to court. And you know, the accusation is that it is because the man took his brother to court, as they call them in the Liberian context. That is why his children are not able to go to school. So relationships matter, you see. But then when we try to address conflict, even prevent conflict, and you know, build the capacities that are necessary for ensuring peace and security, we have often tended to focus on the statutory mechanisms or institutions at the expense of indigenous mechanisms that are familiar to people in most African communities. Prof talked about Ubuntu. He talked about Palava Heart in Liberia, for example. In Liberia, people are interested in knowing the fact. When there are disputes, even in cases involving murder, they want to understand what happened. And the person responsible has a responsibility to own up or accept responsibility for that particular crime. In addition, he's required to plead for forgiveness. Okay? It is only when all these processes are exhausted that the victim can forgive the perpetrator. If the case went to court without going through all these processes, one can be sentenced to jail for 5 years, 10 years. He might come to the community. The community are not going to welcome him. You know, so there's a fundamental role for African political philosophers to begin to reflect on all these issues in ways that enable us to begin to pay closer attention to mechanisms or resources that work within our own context. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Prof has gone through a lot, but the rest I would appreciate if we could bring the theme out so clearly, especially the correlation between the higher education space and ensuring peace and security in Africa as well. Then we can also move as well. Thank you. We can pick the next microphone.
Okay, to answer that issue, I think the organizers did very well in actually noting this correlation between higher education and then this thing. And indeed, I must say that they also did very well in the sort of theme they chose towards peace, powerful and secure Africa, towards a peaceful and secure Africa through quality higher education. The fact of the matter is that, to me, the issue is not, well, the issue is that higher education, the products of higher education play a very important role in our society, particularly given our environment. They tend to be the political elite, the elite in all respects, opposition, government, whatever. This invariably, leaders in business, leaders in government, leaders in education, all spheres of life are the products of higher education, generally in our society. And in our context of mass illiteracy and all that, these products are more powerful than perhaps they are in other societies. Therefore, in our context, the movers and shakers of society are the products of higher education. they decide virtually everything, through whatever means. They are so influential. They are so powerful. They need not be political. They can stay away from politics, still they are influential, just by virtue of their having accessed higher education. And therefore, to establish peace in the society, given their role, their access to education, they have a very, very important role to play. And it's on that score that I think that is a very, very important role, because these are the leaders and the deciders. These are the administrators, the everything of society. They carry society along. They are the movers and the shakers. And therefore, it's very important that they must have, they decide and they administer, and therefore they must have whatever. On that note, I must say that they also right to have chosen this sort of team. There is a distinction between peace and then security. And I'm very happy that they bring in those two words. Peace may be good, but as the keynote speaker pointed out, Prof pointed out very, very well, there can be negative peace, there can be positive peace. But aside that distinction, the fact stands that security, as Prof again points out, has a very wide meaning in the modern-day context. And it's very important that we fix our mind on the peace dimension, how to secure peace, and not only that, how to secure security. And I must say that in many African countries, we are losing both peace and security. And therefore, it's very important that those who decide society should be able to focus on a team like this, so that we see how to actually ensure that our leaders, our administrators, our decision makers in our society are actually imbued with peace and the qualities of peacemaking and all that, so that we can actually achieve whatever goals we want to achieve in life.
All right. So, Doc, if without changing what you want to share now, do you think that having quality education necessarily will lead to we having a peaceful and secure continent?
Well, if you look at it theoretically, it should. Your ability to have access to higher education should be able to give you the necessary knowledge and tools and skills equally that would enable you to engage in the act of conflict prevention, management, and resolution. But the reality is, does it? Because I've had the opportunity to reflect on this week, that if all our politicians, majority of them, have had access to higher education, how in our everyday engagement, conversations, engaging people and engaging opposition, how do we see this reflect? If it is not reflecting, and our leaders to some extent, because the literature proves it, and practice also proves it, that the causes of conflict can be greed, grievance, and and the like, and that the elite usually ride on the sentiment of people, ride on the sentiment of the social fallout and gaps that people would want to have, and they don't have to advance their cause. So if people who have had access to higher education, we do not see a difference, then we need to look at how we teach, how we do research, and how we engage. Is there the need now to not only have peace education on the formal level being taught, but move on further at the informal level in our homes, engage how children are raised, not to see difference, not to see color, how children are raised to be much more tolerant. And even as children, we given them the knowledge and the requisite tools to be able to resolve conflicts. How do we take the conversation also to a much more broader space, like religious institutions, the traditional leaders, including them in mediation? Because Dr. Dance talked about the fact that sometimes the judiciary does not help, because in the end we all want peace. We will want it in much more sustainable way, that the community can move on further past what the issue is. So then at the informal level, aside the home, religious setting, markets, tradition, then we should also look at how the trainings are done. What kind of trainings are done? How are the curriculums structured? Not only to be donor focused, because there are occasions whereby it is what the donor wants that is done, but everything being done with the end goal that our mindset will change, because that's the essence of peace education. That there will be a behavioral change, there will be an attitude change, in as much as you get the skills and the knowledge. In that everybody is engaged equally. And then we move on, we don't just focus on the formal setting, but we move on to the rural areas and then engage people. These things are being done. But sometimes when you look at how civil society is doing it, because everybody has gotten different funding, things are not well coordinated. And when things are not well coordinated, what indicators are we using to measure its effectiveness? We see this being done. Okay, next year is election here. So we'll see much more advocacy being done. But is the effectiveness? If we are going to have a 2020 election, for instance, in Ghana, where there will be less violence and less tension in the hotspot areas, probably that would give an indication of how effective the work of civil society has been and how much higher education is proving to be. But there is the need to rethink how it is done.
Great. So establishing the fact that definitely having quality education automatically transcends, not even not automatically, there is that kind of relationship. Then my question is, even before we will appreciate today, that is the present, we need to understand where we have come from as a continent, what has been the issues in the past, what have we been able to do as higher education stakeholders presently, and that will help us appreciate what we need to do in the future. Do you have any thought around where we have been, where we are now, and where we must be in terms of peace and security in Africa?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think as a continent, especially in the 1980s, we're besieged with so many conflicts. I mean, up to the 90s, a lot of conflicts happened. We can talk about Liberia, the Great Lakes region, and many other areas. But from the 2000s, there's been improvement in peace and security in Africa, to some extent. Most of the conflicts that occur are now at a minimal level, although we see some areas still boiling. And in terms of this, the role that higher education has played in all this is the sort of leadership that we produce. What type of leaders are we producing for the society? Take a casual look at all our leaders all over the continent. Most of them are educated. But are they producing the type of leadership that we all want in terms of quality leadership for the society? There are a lot of demands from society. I mean, if we take a look at our country itself, there are many protest movements that are growing up about roots, about many issues. In Sudan, student leaders were very, very active in bringing down the regime of al-Bashir. Are we able, as students, or even people in quality, in higher education, are we able to do the right type of activism that can actually bring about change in society? How can we serve as catalysts for change in this society? This is the sort of education that I think we can do. In our own small way, I think many universities are doing very well. Let's look at our engagement with society. I take, for example, my own institution, University of Cape Coast. Our department was established just in 2008. And aside from producing manpower for the security services, other institutions, I think we have also engaged a lot in community development through the training of chiefs and other community leaders. We've engaged in mediation training. We've done a lot with the National Peace Council. We're very active in the establishment of National Peace Council. And all this is making an impact. And many countries are looking up to Ghana and other countries that are making inroads in some of these areas. I have, for example, over the past 3 years, seen countries from Guinea, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, come to learn from our examples. So all these things are positive impacts that we are making. Our chiefs are being trained in ways of handling, non-violent ways of handling conflict. If you look at us, we also trying to train students leaders. You know, this demonstration that happened in the University of Science and Technology. We, 2 years ago, started this idea of training student leaders on non-violent approaches to peace building within our campuses and beyond. So if we are able to serve as catalysts for change, we can make a lot of inroads. I know of the University of Nairobi in Kenya. They together with the Kenya National Security Agencies, are training a lot of police officers in diploma, post-diploma, and degree programs in peace and security handling. And are all this making a lot of impact on society in terms of the democratic process, human rights, and securing a peaceful society where everyone respects humanity as prophet. So you can look at it from a perspective in our own small way. Universities are doing very well to improve and ensure that the trainings that we give actually have impact on the life of society.
The legal perspective, I know you are a legal practitioner, and what would be your thought? Higher education, having a peaceful continent and a secure one. What are your initial thoughts? But beyond that, I would want you to address the issues of what are the shortfalls in our system and what must we do to ensure that higher education plays a high-level role in having a secure and a peaceful continent.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sam, and thank you everybody here. So to address the very first question, I'd want us to avert our minds to what the nature of security is, so that we do not pigeonhole security into just one monolithic whole. We have to look at it in its strands, the various strands it is. And for me, we are approaching a very messy crossroads. But it is a stratified crossroads that we are at. And what do I mean by that? So for example, there are various things which are being thrown into it. One, you have like cybersecurity. You have different typologies of security. You have cybersecurity, you have maritime security, you have border security, you have food security, you have climate security. You have so many different strands of security. I put them in a messy condition. And they are intersecting somehow. But they are stratified, and therefore they allow us to think through them and allow us to have opportunities. There are strengths with developing each of the ones that I've talked about. There are weaknesses with it. There are threats. There are opportunities. And for the many of us that are here, security offers tremendous opportunity. And so first, to even comment on the choice of subject matter, I think, like Dr. Ansakwe said, this is most appropriate. The African Union itself, its theme for 2019 is on security. It's about refugees, it's about IDPs, it's about internally displaced persons. But this is to look at the physical aspects of the security issues you are interested in. Higher education has deep contributions it makes to the other strands I mentioned. In the area of cyber, for example, this country, has just come up with cyber security strategy and policy. That requires inflection, thought, content to be built by Ghanaians themselves, Africans themselves, not by outsiders. We are currently, in fact, if I'm not too mistaken, I think about 2 weeks ago, there was a conversation here in Accra at Kofi Annan Center. It was about the J7++ Friends of Gulf of Guinea. Part of their interest was to look at how you have rule of law on the high seas. The same way as you have Galamsey riveting our land resources. If you go to the sea, for example, Ghana, you have issues there. Not only in Ghana, but the west coast of Africa, the Gulf of Guinea area. And so this is opening up new opportunities for research, for those of us that are here, and for those outside, and for those who are interested in entering it. It is a thriving area where there's a lot of opportunity. So that's the first part. Now your next question asks, you want me to address the issues about how we can resolve some of these things, maybe from a legal perspective. Good. Sam, I would say that what I see in Africa is that we don't have one Africa. Just for conceptual purposes. We don't have one Africa. We have about 3 Africas at least. You have the stable Africa, the Ghanas, the Nigerias, the Botswanas, the Namibia, and so on and so forth. You have also um, those that are fragile. For example, you can give an example of Chad, you can give an example of Mali, you give an example of Burkina Faso, and so on. I mean, these are stable countries, but have lost some control of territory in the definition of states. So somehow, I mean, they pose, they have issues. Okay. Then you can talk about, for example, the failed African states. And there you have a few. You have the Somalias, for example. You have Libya, for example. But then in Libya, because the entirety of Libya, as we know, isn't as it is today. But the good fortune is that these countries, for example, are making progress, however incremental it is. And so the conversations that we have here are very important conversations that are useful both at a national level, at a regional level, and also at an international level. These three are very important. Whether you're dealing with those stable countries, like I mentioned, Ghana, I mean, relatively stable, or you're dealing with the fragile ones, those who have serious issues, but are still in maintaining momentum. And then you're dealing with those who have very intestine problems, and they have actually lost structure as it is that we know them. And so the lessons that we can pick, for example, from Djibouti to the Horn of Africa to Somalia are relevant. The conflict things and the brewers of conflict are relevant. They are deep, and they are possible in any part of Africa. I mean, for example, I mean, you would know that Liberia was fairly stable, and its food issues food security issues were at the heels of Liberia's instability. If you go to northern Nigeria, and I was having a conversation just a while ago with one of the members who is in this audience, he was telling me about, how you can weaponize food in Maiduguri, how you can weaponize food. You get somebody food, and they are ready to do bombings for you, whether it's in Maiduguri, in Nigeria, or it is in Gurasa in Kenya. The situation is still the same, because the Al-Shabaab forces pick and share notes. So the conversations that we have here are broadly good. Rule of law is important if we have to strengthen it. Good governance is another. We have to strengthen that aspect. We must look at security sector reform, and particularly security sector governance. So these three are things that I hold most close to my heart. And I think that if we can address these things, we won't be out of all the woods, but we would be largely nearing a more stable and fairly useful nation-state era. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Interesting stuff there. Sadiq, you represent the student constituent, and when you look through the audience, you realize that we have a lot of students. Now, what will be your general assertion and your opening remarks on the theme, and any key thing that you want to share?
All right, thank you, Sam, and good afternoon to distinguished guests here. I think in our local parlance, we will say that opini jari anensuasa. And so looking at the experts that have been paneled to discuss this issue, I want to look at it from the student angle, and then I want to share two examples, one as a student and one as a soldier. And then in 2016, in the run-up to the elections, as a PRO for the SRC for Pentecost University, I was just looking at how the atmosphere was, and then I decided to put up a program to educate my peers on election violence here and there. And it was amazing to know that most of us were not fully aware of some of the implications in getting ourselves involved, where some of our colleagues were taken as far as to Western region to go and then monitor elections, and some of them were not even able to take their exams, and became a problem. And so the theme that has been chosen for me is placed well, and then it has to do with what Professor Shidi also said, that when you look at, for instance, issues of thinking, critical thinking in our schools these days, it means that peace and security aspects can also be placed in our content, the educational system, in a way that will inform the students about some of the implications or the issues around peace and security. And for me, it was another motivation factor to go to Kofi Annan to do a further study on that, in order for us to be able to, educate our peers on some of these things, because we are at the receiving end where we are being used for some of these conflict issues. And there again, when Mr. Dixon talked about the food weaponization, and I look at 2011, whilst I was serving with the UN in Congo. You could appreciate what it means to have peace. I mean, it was a real case. And one of the things was that the deputy commandant then, he is from Uruguay. Then he called me to his office and was like, he came to my office actually, and then later called me to his office and he said, when I came to your office, I didn't see you with your fragmentation jacket. And I said, well, if our friends out there are not having that and we are here, we think we need to protect ourselves. So when you vary the situation, it means that we need to really get into the youth and then let them understand that it doesn't take violence, or you don't need to be hired for all of these things. And then one aspect that is also missing is the media. And as a media practitioner, this is the third time I'm going for a program, and it doesn't seem to occur that the media is actually incorporated into the system. At the Kofi Annan Peace and Security Forum, where my boss, I worked under my boss over there, we came up with a 14 plan, and just because there was no time, the 14th item, as we did the summation, was on media, and so we missed that aspect. Even though at the sidelines, media issues were discussed, at the plenary, there was no media expert who was involved deeply in the plenary session. And so when we came back to put on this, so the media in this for me, is one area, and that is where we could have both the formal and the informal education to go deep into our people, in order for us to be able to educate them very well. Because, I mean, if you look at the media space in Ghana today, trust you me, the agenda setting issues around issues of conflict here and there is massive and is very deep. And so once we are able to also incorporate them very well into the whole peace and security architecture, then we'll be able to also have some level of changes to that. Thank you.
Thank you very well. Let's put our hands together for them. I think for the second round of questions, we would like to be looking at some other critical issues, even still around the central theme. Now, we all know that universities are set up for three basic things: teaching and learning, research, and community engagement or service. Now, we want to break this theme very down to the level of even the student that we teach, because we are talking about Africa we want. If we want a peaceful and secure Africa by the next 50 years, then it means that the young people who are coming, and I love some of the submissions that you made, for example, what Dr. Ifwa said, that we need to look at right from raising our young ones and children. In terms of teaching and learning, in terms of research, advocacy could be, research dissemination it could be, and in terms of community engagement and service, what specific roles must higher education space play in ensuring that by 2063 we indeed have a peaceful and secure Africa? And when we meet around the table and we are looking at the indicators, we have a good story to tell, that indeed we have come from point A to point B, specifically, especially for young ones who are here in this room. I think I would start from, where's the microphone now? Okay, I think you can start from the lawyer. Okay, yes, you can start. No, you have it, you can start. Sure.
Yeah. When you look at the sort of education that we provide for our students, the education itself must have an impact on society. And the students we are teaching, how are we training them in terms of peace, conflict, and knowledge about living peaceful with others? One of the points Prof mentioned, which I want to emphasize, is the fact that normally peace education or even courses in conflict, peace studies, security studies are often focused on only the social sciences. For the sciences, those in business, those in agric, they are not part of the whole process. I mean, why not make this course a sort of interdisciplinary course in which all students are introduced to concepts of peace building, peace education, and living peaceful with others, using whatever means, whether it's traditional, indigenous, or even the modern methods of resolving conflicts. This is very, very important. A focus on the social sciences where it's only social science students in geography, in sociology, anthropology, and political science who are introduced to peace studies itself is not helping. The science students are often left out, and the focus is that they should only be concentrated on doing experiments in the lab. But they are all part of society. And medical students, science students, agri students are members of society who also go out to make impact. They interact with members of the society. And once someone is educated on these issues, the person is able to make an impact. The little advice is able to give to his community members who are engaged in some sort of violence, protest, can help a lot in securing a society. If you look at even our universities, I mean, there's, I may be wrong, but in Ghana, I'm not sure there's any university that has a peace club.
On campus?
No, I'm talking of high education on campus. Okay. Whether the universities or the polytechnics, I'm not sure there's any university like that. For the high school, the basic school, I know there are things like that. But at the university level, there's nothing like that. Why don't we begin clubs that are focused on peace education, where these people go out and talk to people on the need for peaceful election? Now, he just talked about the fact that during the 2016 election, he sort of came out with a strategy to educate people on using non-violence approaches to ensuring that the election was peaceful. I mean, I'm challenging all of us here to sort of think about the formation of peace clubs. At the University of Cape Coast, we started something called the Campus Mediation Center, where we are trying to talk to students, educating students and training students leaders on how to use peaceful means to resolve conflicts. I mean, if we can, throughout our universities, set up most of these organizations, we can help. Even youth groups themselves, the campus leadership can lead in this direction. Even our students who are there, when we come out, we can form what we call local peace committees on our own, in our communities. And all these committees can be very helpful, can be useful in educating people on peace and security within the community.
All right, interesting. Vice, we come to you. Okay.
And so I think that he made a very excellent point about the nature of the education. What I want to do is actually to look at it in a diversified manner. You see, I think that what academia should be interested also is the nature of instruction that gets to those in the security services, for example. That is also another area that is really begging for attention. And so what am I talking about? So I'm saying that, for example, you look at the nature of the programs that are being given to the police, for example, are being given to our intelligence, for example, are being given to our defense sector, for example, are being given to those in customs, those in immigration. There's a diversity of fields array themselves before academics. But what I do see, however, is that most academics are constricted or retain the discussion. They're doing a good job at it, but not necessarily at the content of instructions getting them. So I'll give you a typical example. So if you pick, for example, defense, not only in Ghana, but in Africa and many parts, teaching of subjects like the laws of war, law in lawless times, military professionalism and rule of law, for example, for a long, long, long time, if you look at many of the UN reports, had been at a very low ebb. So you do have professional soldiers who are in many African countries who behave just like insurgent forces behave, you know, because of the quality of training or instruction that is, you know, and law underpins a lot of things in security. So if you talk about enforcement, policing, it's law enforcement, the enforcement of law. If you don't know the law, what are you really enforcing? So that is an aspect of intrusion that I think that, you know, if you talk about education, for example, you can also think about those even in intelligence. Around the world, there aren't many in Africa that are looking, for example, at intelligence. Professor Ibo Hachfu wrote a book about intelligence dynamics in Africa. And he lamented in that book the situation of many countries and their intelligence institutions regarding rule of law again. And he made a lot of submissions in that book. It's a book I recommend to a lot of people here. And one of the things that one would draw would be what is happening in other parts of the world. In other parts of the world, there's a lot of interest, for example, in, like I said, intelligence. So oversight over intelligence is an area you can look at. And that's an area for higher education. This is not an area for lower education. It's higher education, intrusion into these areas. They can make a lot of difference. If you take it to areas maybe that pertain to maybe customs, immigration, and the like, most of these people who work there need a lot of interagency coordination efforts and the like. They need it intra the country, that is forces within the country, agencies within the country. They also need it regionally because we live within regions. We live within a spectrum of nations that have reinforcing, they reinforce. So if our borders are weak, it makes it easier for others in other countries to penetrate. If our borders are strong, other people think that perhaps, we're a stable country that is an oasis of peace, exporting trouble to theirs. And so there's a kind of symbiosis between us. They can explore these kinds of linkages. At the international level, Ghana makes a very important monumental contribution to world peace. Both from when it comes to the United Nations has a body called the Group of Governmental Experts. Ghana has been on this. If you talk about aspects to do with peacekeeping, peace building in many countries, from East Timor to Yugoslavia to Rwanda to Kenya to wherever, the Ghanaian force has actually been there. So I think that models that we can learn from the things that we do and how we can change the nature of instructions that get to those at the senior level. There's something also there that academics can focus on.
All right, thank you very much. Let me take your thought, Dr. Efua, and I'll come to you. Okay.
Interesting conversation here. I like something that you said about the soldiers not behaving like soldiers. Some of them really, they are not soldiers. Because if you take the case of Uganda, where because of the conflict in northern Uganda, and you know how much money there is in peacekeeping, so people are added to soldiers and to police officers as if they are well trained, but they are not. They really lack it. So, for instance, in the AMISOM mission, lots of people are dying. They are dying to the extent that I understand even the 1 minute silence is not observed because they don't have the rudiments of soldiering, and to the point that they are engaged in local misnomers and all that they should have no business engaged in. And then, of course, is the responsibility of states to train their soldiers or to train their peacekeepers. But some states do not train them adequately, which leads to more trouble for us than they should. And we have human nature too. The learning, having taught for some time, I've realized that you can teach, but it's the responsibility of the student to accept. Many students finish school and they are learning, but they are not educated because they are refusing to unlearn to learn and to learn and to unlearn. So at that level, there is not much that a lecturer can do. It's an individual decision to change. But what I try to do, and I think other lecturers try to do, is to appeal to the mind so that there will be a mind formation or mind transformation.
The affecting domain.
Yes, that would in the end get Africa to go to where it needs to. But if we teach and there is no change in thoughts or thinking, then we'll still be at the same place. So I would like to talk about research because they've talked about teaching. I think that from some experiences I've gained in research in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Ghana, there is the need for more primary research to be done than secondary research. Because secondary research is just you looking at the data that you have, some of which may be primary to use. But I've also seen that there are some conversations that must be had on the ground. There is something about you being amongst people, being with them, much more of an action research, and then learning, and your minds being open your mind of understanding being open. So you ask questions that may not have been asked before. Or you get data that enables you to do a much more different analysis and interpretation that will be useful towards policy and towards strategies. And one such thing will be terrorism in the Lake Chad Basin. Because how do we even think of terrorism? Looking at its changing nature, how do we think of the actors in terrorism? Do we continue to think of women as victims, not as combatants, as fundraisers, as sponsors, or as recruiters? Because if we do not have these conversations or conduct these research, we will tend to have the same old strategies that are not effective. So I think that primary research is needed. But aside the research, when I conduct a research and I publish it, how many people have access to it? Aside students or people in academia or people who like to move beyond the comfort of their profession to read. Yes. How many people have access to that? So then you have to move on to dissemination of the research. If you give a 20-page paper to someone who will not read it, what should you then do? Could we think also of policy briefs that can be disseminated intentionally to state and non-state actors? So if I write something that I think that moving forward, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Integration should be involved, then I send these policy briefs to them. But that must also be strategically done, because leaving it at their foyer or reception, will it get them to read it? Because they need to know there should be a closure of the gap that is between research and the industry, or research and policy makers and policy formulators and implementers. And that is where I think that the community engagement comes in as part of higher education. More community engagement, working with civil society organizations who already have the platforms, so we can engage, yes, at different levels, because it should be intrapersonal, interpersonal, intergroups, national, and then international, so that we can have much more effectiveness.
Great.